Welcome everyone to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library, or Sunday afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. We are meeting on Zoom because of the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, we met at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library in Oakland, California. And we expect that we will go back there next year, but we will also continue on Zoom. And we're going to figure out the hybrid, what they call the hybrid way of doing this. So we are a group of Marxists who like to address important issues, and we do not belong to any one party or represent any one organization, but we are united around the idea expressed by Marx that the philosophers have studied the world, but the point is to change it. So that is our underlying goal and philosophy. The way we work is that we'll have an hour presentation this morning from Eugene Ruyle, and then we'll have another hour of Q&A and discussion. And in between those two things, we take a little break for announcements and an appeal for money, because we do need some resources to keep ourselves going. So with that, I'd like to introduce Eugene Ruyle, who is going to talk to us about what we should be, what he believes we should be believing now about the future of revolution, given that it's the 105th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. So I think that's about all the introduction that Eugene needs. Please get started, Eugene.
Okay, thank you, Sharon, and welcome everybody. And let me get this screen sharing going. Okay, and I think, let's see. Okay, I hope everybody can see that okay.
Yes, but it says that today is December 7th.
Well, aside from that, it's November 7th, as everybody knows,
Right.
And daylight savings time has ended. We have fallen back. And the title of today's talk is Socialism in the Belly of the Beast. That's the title, but since this is the 105th anniversary of the October Revolution, I think I wanted to spend a little time just remembering that day, because it was on this day that the workers and peasants of Russia, with the leadership of Lenin and the Bolshevik Party, transformed the world under the banner of bread, land, and peace. And as A. Philip Randolph wrote, the Black Socialist, wrote at the time, the Soviet is doubtless the most hated, the most loved, and the most misunderstood political institution in the world today. The Russian people love it. The capitalists of all nations hate it. Most people don't understand it, because the channels through which they gain information are controlled by its enemies, the capitalists. And that's pretty much true today. But in 1924, the Constitution of the USSR proclaimed that since the founding of the Soviet republics, the states of the world have been divided into two camps: the camp of capitalism and the camp of socialism. There, in the camp of capitalism, national hate and inequality, colonial slavery and imperialistic wars. Here, in the camp of socialism, reciprocal confidence and peace, national liberty and equality, the pacific coexistence and fraternal collaboration of peoples. Now, some people may think that's overly optimistic, but I don't. And I think if one examines this empirically, as scientific socialists we feel compelled to do, we would have agreed with the British communists, Kenneth Neil Cameron, who wrote suggested in a somewhat different context, so this is taken from what he said, that Marx would have seen that whatever their faults, these societies, the socialist world, are on the whole the best that history can produce at present, and that those who parade utopian blueprints are not helping, but are rather hindering. Marx would have seen that these are vigorous and growing social organisms, and that if we had a world of nations like the Soviet Union, the PRC, the People's Republic of China, and Cuba, there would be neither war nor imperialism, neither exploitation, mass oppression, poverty, nor starvation, and no threat of nuclear annihilation. Now, there are many flavors of socialism, and they all taste better than capitalism. But the revolutionary core of socialism lies in those countries that had socialist revolutions led by Lenin's Third or Communist International: the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, Vietnam, and Korea. And I've already discussed this at some length. And let me just run over, because if we are scientists, we need to look at this carefully. And the history of socialism can usefully be divided into three segments: 19th century, 20th century, and 21st century. The 19th century saw the move, which lasted from 1825 to 1914. It went from utopian to scientific socialism, and we saw the socialism develop, the working class developed with labor unions, political parties, the Paris Commune, and very important writers such as Kautsky, Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg, and others. Phase two, and unfortunately that phase ended with what some people see as the betrayal of 1914, when the German Social Democratic Party voted to support the war effort. And this was a shock to everybody. Lenin wouldn't believe it. He thought it was just bourgeois propaganda. And Rosa Luxemburg and others considered suicide. It's just like all of a sudden we realized that we failed, basically. And that was traumatic for people. But the honor of the socialist movement, as Rosa Luxemburg said, was redeemed in the 20th century with the revolution of 1917. And that period, I think, can be divided into a period of socialism in one country up through the end of World War II, and secondly, into the phase of socialism in many countries, when basically the bulk of humanity either lived in socialist countries or were fighting against imperialism using socialism as their tool. But the way in which socialism spread worried the imperialists, and this led to the Empire Strikes Back, a counter-revolution led by Boris Yeltsin and George H.W. Bush in December, and then the catastrophic defeats, the whole period, 1989 to 1993. And this was tragedy and farce, to borrow Hegel's statement there. And the tragedy was Gorbachev, of course, who was trying to do other things, and the farce was Yeltsin. And this period gave us Margaret Thatcher's famous phrase, "Tina, there is no alternative." to which our comrade, KJ No, I believe, is the one that told it to me, tapas. There are plenty of alternatives in socialism. So that's our motto there. And then phase 3 was 21st century socialism from 1989 to the present. And I think the two dominant forms here were socialism with Chinese characteristics and Bernie-style socialism, primarily in the US. So my own response to this was that Marx was right in the 19th century, Lenin was right in the 20th century, and that our goal in the 21st century is to do for Leninism what Lenin did for Marxism. What that means, I'm still trying to figure out, but it remains my view. However, when I say that the revolutionary core of socialism lies in those countries that have had socialist revolutions, primarily the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, that does not mean that socialist struggles in the imperialist nations are not important. And that's the topic of my talk today. And I want to look at the development of socialism in the belly of the beast. And this goes back to 1967. I was going to start there, when millions of Americans were in the street. Many of us, I think, were out there also in the streets protesting the war in Vietnam. This is when Che Guevara told us, "I envy you, North Americans. Yours is the most important struggle of all. You live in the belly of the beast." But what would Che tell us in 2021, when we have a bipartisan beating of the drums of war and our domestic politics are, well, interesting? So this is Che telling us that his famous quote and the iconic picture of Che there. And he said this apparently to Jerry Rubin, who was traveling around the world, has stayed stopped in Cuba, and he didn't want to come back home because there was a bunch of bullshit going on back in the United States. But then Che showed up and gave him those famous words that inspired him and his friends. The country that had massacred the Native Americans, brought African Americans here as slaves, stole half of Mexico's land, oppressed Asians and Hispanic immigrants, not to mention Irish, Jewish, and Italian ones. Where better to fight for what is right? But there's a larger consideration, and our fight is important because it is the historical mission of the American people to destroy the beast itself, imperialism. This is something, unfortunately, that we have yet to understand, but no one else can do it. So the responsibility is ours. And as Dr. King stressed, it is our government that is doing this. But before we look at the history of the struggle for peace and socialism here in the United States, let's look at what we actually accomplished back then. And this was in October 21st, 1967, when this was after Che had been murdered. But there was increasing mobilization against the war, and including Jerry Rubin, Abby Hoffman, and their friends after the mobilization to end the war in Vietnam on October 21st, 1967, they all went to the Pentagon, and they were going to levitate it up and send it out into outer space. And they actually went to the National Park Service and got a permit to do this, but the National Park Service said, yeah, but only 10 feet. You can't, that's the maximum. But clearly, this was not the work of a disciplined vanguard party. It was something else entirely. But I think it's important that this was the spirit of the time. Everybody was behind this in the United States. And as the Irish revolutionary James Connolly wrote, no revolutionary movement is complete without its poetical expression. Until the movement is marked by the joyous, defiant singing of revolutionary songs, it lacks one of the most distinctive marks of a popular revolutionary movement. It is the dogma of a few, not the faith of the multitude. And this quote is on the wall of the Starry Plough pub in Berkeley, where sometimes we used to meet, and it still has an ongoing program there. It's a neighborhood pub that takes its name from Connolly's pledge that Ireland shall be free from the plow in the dirt to the stars in the sky. Let me go back here. So there's this poetical aspect to the resistance during the 1960s. One of the periods of flowering, I think, of popular culture, anti-war peace struggles, and various songs. I put one in here, "Come on, mothers throughout the land, pack your boys off to Vietnam. Come on, fathers, don't hesitate, send them off before it's too late. Be the first one on your block to have your boy come home in a box." So that was one of the tenors. And there's always also the very popular, "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?" And basically, LBJ couldn't handle that. He just got discouraged because this was not what he was trying to do. And so on March 31st, 1968, he gave the words that we all want to hear from our presidents: "I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president." So that, and I remember watching that on TV with friends, and I think everybody in the United States at that time basically shared these ideas. And out of the Civil War movements, the civil rights movements, anti-war movements, this led to a social and political intellectual ferment, out of which socialists developed an understanding that Vietnam was an imperialist war waged by a racist country against socialist Vietnam, against communism, and that the American people did not support, nor did they benefit from this war. Pretty much the way things are today, but we still have a ways to go there, I think. Now, in putting together this program, I have to say, one thing, I remember all these things. We all remember what was going on there, but I get kind of mixed up with what happened first and what did happen second, and when did all these things happen. So I had to do a lot of Wikipedia searches and others to find out, well, when did they try to levitate the Pentagon, and did it work, and things like this. So I watched a lot of things, and one of the things I did watch was this program, The Vietnam War in 30 Minutes. And this gave the mainstream narrative that the Vietnam War began in good faith by people with good intentions. And that's a very dubious thing. And it forgets one little thing, and that is the Nuremberg trials after World War II, which was initiated and run by the United States. And they looked at what happened in World War II, and they said that the charges in the indictment of the Nazi government, that the defendants planned and waged aggressive wars, are charges of the utmost gravity. War is essentially an evil thing. Its consequences are not confined to the belligerent states alone, but affect the whole world. To initiate a war of aggression, therefore, is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. And so by waging this war, all of the evils that occurred during World War II, the Holocaust, are contained in the decision of the Nazis to wage an aggressive wars. And this found its way into the UN Charter. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner consistent with the purposes of the United Nations. And there's nothing in here, that gives the US Senate the right to declare war, particularly an aggressive war such as Vietnam and the whole series of wars. So I think in view of this, how should we regard the war in Vietnam? Did the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which was bogus as we know, justify that? Or the wars in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, and so forth? Or the new Cold War on China? Are these also crimes, ultimate crimes against humanity? So I'll let you ponder that. Maybe we can return to that in the Q&A. Not sure how we're doing. I hope we're doing okay. Okay, so then after, we got rid of LBJ, we all very happy about that, but not clear that that was the wisest move, because look what came after LBJ, this whole crew: Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Reagan, Bush. George H.W. Bush, as we know, was the head of the CIA. So here our nice democracy actually elected the head of the secret police to head our nation. So, and then we had others, and also George H.W. Bush. He was, his father was Prescott Bush, whom you may know as actually tried to organize a fascist coup in 1936. And they had Senate hearings on that, but they decided that the best thing to do would be to cover that up and not talk about it. So, but there are sources on that. And then the others, but if you look through this, for all his faults, Nixon, for example, did end the draft. He didn't start any new wars that I know of. And he also opened up diplomatic relations with China, which again, and Ronald Reagan, whom some of us call Ronald Reagans, the fascist gun in the West, but he invaded Little Grenada that had all of 111,000 people in it, which basically is smaller than Berkeley, which again, Reagan invaded back in the 1969, I think, when he was governor. And that led to the establishment of People's Park here. So all of those things going on.
Excuse me, Gene, you had questioned if you're on time. You're halfway through your time.
Oh, okay. Well, I think I'm halfway through my talk, so
okay,
that's good. I did a lot of editing at 5 o'clock this morning, new time. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. and review the history of socialism here in the belly of the beast, which was back in those days, it was a baby beast. It was the younger brother of English imperialism, British imperialism. But the first socialists in America were, of course, the Indians, who, as Lewis Henry Morgan pointed out, had a system of ancestral communism. And they also had a tremendous impact on the social and political life of the United States. The Seneca Falls Convention, for example, was in Seneca Falls because the people who organized it knew all these Indian women and admired them so much. And many scholars argue that the American colonists drew freely on the image of the American Indian as an exemplar of the spirit of liberty that they so cherished, and borrowed certain indigenous concepts for our own government. Moving on, the first European socialist was Robert Owen, who was a self-made man. He ran a factory according to what he very enlightened principles, and he came to the United States in 1825 to to put his theories into practice and develop a socialist community. And when he got here, he found he didn't have to organize one because there were already, United States had so many utopian communities already that all he had to do was buy one. He bought the town of Harmony, renamed it New Harmony, and started on that basis. But what's interesting about Owen is that when he came in 1825, he addressed the US Congress and others, outlined his vision for a utopian community and his socialist beliefs. And his audience included three former US presidents, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, as well as the outgoing President James Monroe and the president-elect John Quincy Adams. So this was, in some senses, a high point because it was the first discussion, open and positive discussion of socialism in the Americas and particularly in the US Congress. Okay, but that was not yet scientific socialism. We have to go back to Marx and Engels and the working classes, the Chartist movement, and other things in Europe. And they gave us the Communist Manifesto, which was the first work of scientific socialism. And their friend, Joseph Wiedemeyer, he fought in, he was a military officer in the Kingdom of Prussia, as well as the United States later. And he was a member of the League of Communists. He helped Marx write the German ideology, as well as the Communist Manifesto. And he fought in the war of the revolutions of 1848 and decided he'd better leave Europe and came to the United States. He helped form the first Marxist organization in the United States in 1852. And there were a series of communist clubs in New York and that area. And they supported the nomination and election of Lincoln in 1860. And then they all had to disband because they all joined the Union Army to support the Union cause in the Civil War. And Marx also supported the Union cause, organized demonstrations against letting the capitalists in England support the Confederacy. So that's very important. After that there were continuing upheavals, the great upheaval of labor, the railroad strike in 1877, the National Labor Union, 1866 to 1873, the Knights of Labor, and the American Federation of Labor. There was the Haymarket Square and May Day, and so many other things developed during that period. There was also Daniel de Leon, who I have a certain affection for because when I was an undergraduate at Berkeley, there was a little stand that had the Weekly People. You could buy it for a nickel or something. But that's where I got my first doses of socialism. So I've always had a soft spot in my heart for the SLP. But then we come to, I think, many of our favorite socialists was Eugene V. Debs. And he said, wars throughout history have been waged for conquest and plunder. The master class has always declared the wars. The subject class has always fought the battles. And he's also responsible for that famous quote that we all love. I'd rather vote for something I want and not get it than vote for something I don't want and get it. And Debs also ran for president as convict number 9653 because he was imprisoned for that. And I threw this picture in there also. It was J. Stitt Wilson, who was mayor of Berkeley in 1911. So we had our moments. Next on the agenda, we have the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW. And the slogan, an injury to one is an injury to all. It stood for one big union, one big strike. And the preamble is very important, I think. And I'd like to read it here. The working class and the employing class have nothing in common. There can be no peace as long as hunger and want are found among millions of the working people, and the few who make up the employing class have all the good things of life. Between these two classes, a struggle must go on until the workers of the world organize as a class, take possession of the earth and the machinery of production, and abolish the wage system. They further said that it is the historic mission of the working class to do away with capitalism and imperialism. And we had a speaker at one time from the IWW, who, as we know, people think of as anarchists, but they pointed out that this is straight Marxism. Who coined the phrase, abolish the wage system? That was straight from Marx. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. Okay, that's just another thing there. Okay, moving forward. We have FDR and the New Deal coalition. And I think this is important because we don't usually think of them as socialists. But after the great Wall Street crash, we had, that led to a Great Depression, not just in America, but also Europe and Asia. We saw both the rise of fascism and the emergence of the New Deal and similar movements. And again, this was not just FDR. In California, socialists supported Upton Sinclair's bid for governor with his End Poverty in California slogan. In Louisiana, you had Huey Long, who threatened to launch a third party saying, share our wealth. And in the Midwest, we had the Farmer Labor Party, who won many seats in Congress during the 1930s. And FDR was able to co-opt all these people by incorporating them into his platform. In response to Huey Long, he promoted new taxes and welfare programs, where third-party politicians already held power. Roosevelt explicitly allied themselves with them, supporting the American Labor Party mayor of New York City, of Fiorello LaGuardia, and the progressive governor of Wisconsin, Philip La Follette. So he was able to put together this coalition of labor unions, communists, socialists, liberals, ethnic minorities, Catholics, Jews, Black people, and poor Southern whites. And this put together a majority of voters and handed the Democratic Party 7 victories out of 9 presidential elections and control of the both houses of Congress. And on this, again, I think there's tremendous support that the American people gave to FDR. And I came across this quote that after Pearl Harbor, and I think it's relevant concerning the Green New Deal and so forth, people are talking about today, because FDR called all the industrial leaders together to talk about what he needed. And he said, I want you people to devote a certain number of tanks, certain number of battleships, destroyers, jeeps, and so forth. And he listed all these industrial demands that he had. And they looked at him like he was crazy. And they said, Mr. President, you don't understand. We have to build 3 million new cars for the American people. And Roosevelt said to him, no, you don't understand. I'm banning the production and sale of new passenger cars for the duration. Now I'm waiting for Biden to propose that because his majority is slim enough as it is. But that was the tenor of the times. And socialism was definitely on the agenda. And not just in the United States, but in Sweden, they talked about the middle way between communism and capitalism. And there was this book by Childs, I believe, Sweden, the Middle Way. And Roosevelt read that. He was very enthusiastic. He reportedly said, in Sweden, you have a royal family and a socialist government and a capitalist system, all working happily side by side. Not sure they were all that happily. And the thing that's left out of this little equation here is the fact that these were imperialist countries. It was not a road open to the masses in the oppressed nations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. But the New Deal continued after the war, the largest strike wave in American history, but this response was a shift to the right, a new set of foreign policies, a new set of domestic policies, and basically between McCarthyism, the Taft-Hartley Act, and the Cold War, socialism became unacceptable. And that's where we were back in the 60s, the flowering of resistance during that period. But before we leave the 60s, I wanted to mention one of the greatest spiritual leaders of the American people, who was a democratic socialist, which is not usually celebrated in our MLK Day celebrations. But he said, I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. And here again, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism. But there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all of God's children. And again, this is not usual left rhetoric. We don't talk about God's children. We don't talk about other kinds of things, but he was America's greatest spiritual leader. And he gave his famous speech, Beyond Vietnam, which many of us think was his best speech. Moving forward, he talked about how he came to this, as he walked among the desperate, rejected, angry young men of our ghettos. He told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. And then the social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they asked, and rightfully so, what about Vietnam? They asked if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. The questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. And again, we don't talk about his anti-imperialist, pro-socialist agenda, but it still provides socialists with a workable agenda for socialist intervention. And he repeatedly, I put some of the quotes in there, and he was also in opposition to nuclear weapons, feeling that nuclear weapons should be banned, and any most colossal of all evils is any organizer of war, regardless of rank or nationality. So after the victory of the Vietnamese and the end of the draft, the election of Reagan, socialism all but disappeared in the, especially after the defeat of 1989 through 1983, which led to the fall of the Soviet Union. I always say that it didn't just fall, it was pushed. But shortly after that, then we saw a rekindling of left radical popular movements. Many of us were in Seattle in 1999. And we heard Amy Goodman discuss that and talk about this was the day that the momentum of world history moved from the corporate suites to the Seattle streets. And that was very inspiring. And I think, but it was not a socialist movement. Socialists were not involved with that, and they kind of had a standoffish approach, as I recall. In 2001, after 9/11, again, all talk about resistance was kind of shelved, but this was also the time the answer was formed by the Workers' World Party. Act now to stop war and end racism. So that was an important movement. 2008 to 2009 was the Great Recession when they bailed out Wall Street. And 2011 to 2012 was Occupy Wall Street, and also Occupy Oakland. And I remember, and it was these were inspiring days. And I remember after they busted Occupy Oakland, I was down there. Didn't witness it, but I remember a couple of days later, I got a call from Stan Woods, one of our comrades. He said, be down at the West Oakland BART at 5 a.m. in the morning to ferry people out to the port where we're going to blockade the port. And I figured he was crazy. Who's going to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go to a demonstration? But I did what I was told. I went down there, and there were thousands of people there. And we marched on the port, and I remember the chanting that went on. System sick, it's got to die. Hella, hella, occupy. And that was kind of a revolutionary high for me. It was really inspiring. But this again was an anarchist movement, not a socialist movement. Occupy Oakland also had an impact on ICSS, because prior to that time, we would sit around every now and then, we'd have programs, we'd decide. And I remember while Occupy Oakland was going around, we were sitting around saying, well, I don't know, what do you want to talk about? Well, let's get somebody in here to talk about, something else, this or that. And we decided, well, wait a minute, let's look what's going on in the streets around us. And we started bringing in people to talk about Occupy, the Oakland General Strike, and things like that. And since then, we have met every Sunday, almost, to discuss what's going on. So it did inspire us in ICSS and Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library. And that led to the rise of socialism. 2012 had the word of the year was socialism, according to Merriam-Webster. And Kasama Sawat, an Indian American, was elected to the Seattle City Council as an open socialist, a member of Socialist Alternative, which is a part of international Trotskyism. And then in 2016, you had the Bernie movement, 2018, the Squad, and Bernie became the symbol of all this. And he was like everybody's favorite crazy uncle. I'll comb my goddamn hair when the financial criminals are running Wall Street are in jail. And this was clearly a not clear Marxian class understanding, but it did, again, raise the issue of class here. So that was very important. And so in conclusion, I'm going to talk a little bit about socialism in 2021, both the global situation and socialism in the belly of the beast. And I'm getting very close to the ending. Okay, the global situation. And one of the books here I put in here is Has the West Lost It? This is Kishore Madhubani. I don't know if people know him, but he was the Singapore's ambassador to the United Nations. Very perceptive guy, and he's kind of thinks that, he's sad that the West has not been able to get its act together. But he says that the West's 2-century epoch as a global powerhouse is at an end. A new world order with China and India as the strongest economy dawns. How will the West react to its new status of superpower in decline? And that's one of the big questions, I think, for us today. He has another book, Has China Won? And that's really something that Biden said, well, he knows it's coming, but it's not going to happen in his watch. He's determined to end this. But this idea about the West and the rise of the West, there's this one book by William McNeill that had a big impact that talked about the 500 years of the rise of the West. Prior to that, the specific gravity of humanity was in China and India. Another book by, I forget his name, but it's called Reorient. The idea being that the world is going to reorient. The Orient was ahead up until 1500, and now it's going to leap ahead again. The world is going to reorient itself. These people tend to have a very benign view of the West and the rise of the West. And as Marx said, however, the rise of the West is written in the annals of mankind in letters of blood and fire. And Marx goes on in chapter 31 of Capital about the discovery of gold and silver in America. and how that transformed the world. So I think this is very important perspective that we have to take into account, that the world is changing, and is America going to be able to adapt to those changes in a meaningful world, or is it just going to blow up the world? Because we'd rather, many people think, well, better dead than red, and better to kill off humanity than to let it go communist. And okay, so we want to shift into socialism in the belly of the beast. And again, with full disclosure, the two parties that I do support are both parties that that do not engage in China bashing. The Party for Socialist and Liberation, which is the successor of PSL that runs, and also is the party behind Answer, and the CPUSA, which is also has sister relations, as Gary puts it, with the Chinese Communist Party of China.
Gene, you have 10 more minutes.
Okay, well, I'll finish with minutes to spare.
Good.
Okay, so if we look what's going on, who do we have right now to look at? And very briefly, to run over the current situation, we have the Burners, the Bernie movement, which is very important. Not only Bernie, but the Squad and other people joining the left movement. We have the sectarian left, all those people in various Trotskyist groups, non-Trotskyist groups, and so forth. And most importantly, we still have Trump and the threat of fascism. And some people say, well, he's not really a fascist, we don't blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't really make much difference what you call him. He would be disastrous, I think we'll agree, for not only the United States, but the world. And so on the one hand, little as we would like to say this, the battle seems to be between Democrats and Republicans, because the only force really that can prevent Trump from coming back into power, there's a lot of people, and we've talked about this before. The support for Trump is amazing. It's not going away. So there's that battle. It's also, we have to understand that the battle is not by electoral means alone. There have to be a whole series of other struggles going on. And we have to look at anarchist models such as Seattle and Occupy. Seattle, of course, was organized around spokes councils. You had people gathering into affinity groups, and a very effective model in combating what went the World Trade Center in Seattle. Occupy has these general assemblies in which everybody has a right to vote and so forth. And many people have talked about the need for an independent working class party. And again, I think this is a great idea, but who's going to do it? I don't think the sectarian left is capable of doing it, because they all call for a independent working class party, but they all see themselves as the people who are going to run that independent working class party. So that's rather a pessimistic view. Let me just close with Dr. King's call for a radical revolution of values without which our existential challenges cannot be met. And more concretely, as a member of Veterans for Peace, we have a couple of pathways to peace. One is the pivot to peace with China and the world, basically saying we should be waging peace with China in a win-win kind of situation, not a zero-sum game. And secondly, US out of China and the South China Sea, removing all US troops, military bases from Taiwan, the South China Sea, and that vicinity. So I will close with that, with a plea for, the idea that there are two important things going on in the world today, and in our struggles here in America are not that different than the struggles of China. So I'll stop there. Yep, blank.
Thank you
Back to you,
very
Sarah.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gene. Your beautiful rendition of history, reminds us that the past is never past, for materialists anyway. Before we go to Q&A and discussion, there are two people I'm going to call on. The first is Richard Fallenbaum. Richard, if you could say a few words about funding. Oh, we have to let him, Richard be unmuted.
Okay, thank you. For those of you who haven't heard my pitch before, I'd like to ask for funds to support ICSS and the work we're doing. I posted in the chat some information on how you can contribute. And I'm not talking about large sums of money, $5 or $10 a month, or even $20, $30 on a one-time basis would be very much appreciated. It's very easy these days to do it either through PayPal or a check sent from your bank. You don't have to write out a check. You just get on your computer and have your bank send a check. They'll pay the postage. And it's very, very easy. And you can also on Patreon, not the most preferred, but it allows you, they will send on a regular basis contributions, as will your bank, if you set it up that way in your bill pay. So give it a thought and hope you can contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And then I'm going to call on Alan to talk about our upcoming presentations.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, go ahead. That's your screen. Go ahead.
Yeah. Just wanted to call your attention. We have some great programs lined up coming up. The first one on November 14th will be Bruce Gagnon from the Global Network, who's spoken at the library before, who will be speaking about the impacts from privatization of space, environmental conflicts over celestial claims, and war. He's going to be speaking about, well, those of you who've been wondering about things like the launching the private space tourism and basically privatization and space exploration, be doing a presentation about that that ties into the military. So that's on November 14th. On December 5th, we have a special presentation. Don Corder, who's an RT correspondent and news anchor based in Moscow, will be speaking on what's going on in the Russian Federation, including the recent elections. He'll be talking about the Communist Party in the Russian Federation and the war in the Donbass. And this should be very interesting, speaking to us directly from Moscow. And that's on December 15th. I'm sorry, December 5th. So those of you who have ideas for future presentations, please contact us and let us know. We'd love to have you come and speak, or find a speaker that you think would be an interesting and valuable session for our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. So let's launch into our discussion. I have two people on the stack, Trajan and Yusuf. If you can raise your hand, that's the best way to let me know. But people on the phone might have a little trouble raising their hand, so you can interrupt when we go between speakers, I'll ask you if anybody wants to just put themselves on the stack. And I see Richard W. as the third one. So Trajan, please go ahead.
You have to unmute yourselves.
Okay,
Go
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the problems being in the belly of the beast is there's a couple of things. The system, the capitalist system, makes it very difficult to get into socialism, or if you become a socialist, because you're working so many hours, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, the stress of capitalism, from rent, paying this and paying that, threats from employers, threats from eviction. And a lot of people on the left burn out. They get exhausted from the system itself, so they can't do much politically. Then also the the propaganda, it's just mass media, politicians, and they lie about a lot of what socialism is. And print media, it has an effect. I've seen new members, they join, and then all of a sudden you never hear from them again, because there's constant barrage of lies, propaganda, pressure, and etc. But also I want to just make a quick comment about Bernie Sanders. Yes, Bernie is the best, definitely in the Senate, but he's taken some bad positions on the military and foreign policy. For instance, I remember reading the Ukrainian Nationalist newspaper, and he went to the dedication for Holodomor. And if we have a knowledge about Holodomor, a lot of that is not true by the Ukrainian nationalists. They don't talk about the drought. They just say it's genocide by Stalin and the Communist Party, which we know that's not true. And because I got relatives over there, and my own mother, and she would disavow it was a drought. But anyways, the military budget with Bernie is kind of questionable. And there's pressure. Being a belly of the beast, it's hard to be a politician to go against that military budget, because they start accusing of this and that. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Jean, did you want to say anything in response?
I basically agree. I mean, things are really difficult. I understand. And I'm in a rather good position, being retired, owning my own house and living in Oakland. So, but no, I thank you very much. And I do agree. It's difficult. But we can always quote Mark Twain, I believe, who was also a socialist, at least an anti-imperialist. But he said, if you don't read the Times, you're uninformed. If you do read the Times, you're misinformed.
Right.
So the problem way through that is to at least read other newspapers and other sources. And so, yeah, thank you again.
Thank you, Jean. Next up is Yusuf.
Thank you for an interesting presentation. However, I do wish you'd say a little more on the watershed of the founding of the Communist Party. Even if you're outside the Communist Party, I think many of the groups would trace their roots to that. And also the Black Panther Party, which I think is very significant and rooted in the working class, and that took a Marxist position, even if you have criticisms of it.
Thank you. Jean, you can just jump right in to answer anyone. And if I don't hear you, then I will call on the next person.
Okay, let's keep going. Again, I appreciate these comments, and I agree that this could have easily been a 2-hour program or a 6-week class, but it's not going to be. But I think we need to discuss these things.
Okay. Richard,
hi, Sharon. This is. Well, can you put me on the stack, please?
Who is this?
Kit.
Kit. Okay, sure. Richard
Thank
W.
you.
is next.
So thanks, Gene, for a nice presentation. Nice review of things I'd forgotten about or things that I didn't forget. I wanted to start off by seconding Sharon's opinion on the draft. Originally, I was against the draft and got to rethinking my position on that. And a half a dozen, whatever it was, years ago, came to the conclusion that that being against the draft is really counterproductive in our journey. The thing I was wondering about is I've also been thinking about the role of the Vietnam War, the anti-Vietnam War protests, and I think that we assign more of a role in history to the anti-Vietnam War protests, and I think maybe it deserves. In large measure, and I'm not saying it was wrong. I'm just saying that at the time it was maybe the spear point of various things that were going on. The anti-father knows best movement, the women's movement, where eventually came along out of this, but a lot of the so-called siloing that we're seeing now, but the Vietnam War, it is led very much by elitists. I mean, most of the people that were in the leadership of that were the 20% or so who were attending college, and they were not really working class oriented. So I just wondered if maybe you could comment on that, or maybe you want to skip it. But anyways, thank you.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Thank you, Richard. That was a good comment, and I think it's very true. In one sense, this was a leaderless movement, but on the other hand, whole new sets of things came up, and during that ferment, as you said, there was the women's movement, there was the trans movement, the whole LGBT. There are other kinds of things in the concerns about the environment. And, I said, as I see our problem right now is to do for Leninism what Lenin did for Marxism. Namely, we have to rethink it. And a lot of these things, and this is not an intellectual thing that we have to do. I think the movement has thrown these things out that we have to be concerned about. Some of the things that Lenin perhaps did not deal with adequately. One would be ecology. Traditionally, some people in Marxism aren't into ecology. Religion. I have a quote from Makovic saying that, Marx's atheism was a critique of existing theological concepts, but there are a whole series of new theological concepts, and it's not clear why we should be atheists in regard to Martin Luther King, for example, or a lot of these other ideas. So, and also the whole thing about LGBTQT, the whole, gender movement, the queer movement, and so forth. That now queer has become a statement of a compliment, right? It's not an insult anymore. Maybe it is. I'm not sure. And the whole consciousness of people has changed. And I think the consciousness of our movement has to incorporate these into our programmatic things. And I think that's happening independently of this. Again, one of the things I want to stress is that if we look at the socialist movement over the last 2 centuries, we can't just look at a bunch of ideas coming and going. We have to look at the underlying structure, that it has a life of its own. And we need to understand that. maybe that's more than I needed to say, but
It's okay.
thank you.
Okay. Next is Kit, followed by Rich Fallenbaum. Kit, go ahead. Oh, you have to unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, I keep muting and muting myself. Yeah, I think Eugene's presentation was wonderful. There are so many thoughts about this. I don't have all my notes written down about it, but I just, had an interesting conversation with a friend who's from London, and he's talking about Brexit and the disaster of Brexit and how conditions there are really descending into economic disaster. But anyway, so we were talking a little bit about what we're talking about now on a certain level. I think the conditions, they have to be extreme and stressful for a situation to ripen for a revolutionary movement to really push forward. We've seen Occupy, we've seen Black Lives Matter, and we also see how it kind of fizzles out after a while. There's not the stamina and persistence to keep things going on a level that that keeps going in the same way that we get all excited about. What happens usually is that the Democratic Party will come in, the electoral politics, they'll kind of shift everybody's energy. So if you vote for their candidate, that candidate will be the answer, so-called answer. And we find that that's not really true, but people still buy into that. And that's a problem. We need to be able to get beyond the electoral politics and keep people educated and in motion about what the situation really is. In Oakland, Alameda County, we just lost a very progressive supervisor who not all people on the left agreed with, but her background was definitely from a revolutionary period. And she was recently killed. I guess you may have heard about Wilma Chan. She was pretty quiet, so people didn't have an inkling of where she had come from, except for those activists that had worked with her. But in that midst, there's young people that are wanting to come up among the ranks and run for office, and we're having this contention between the Democratic Party, more moderate elements versus the progressive elements. So we need to support our more progressive young people that are vying for this kind of leadership. But at the same time, we need to keep educating as many people as possible. We've got a big road ahead of us because outside of the Bay Area, we live in a huge bubble here where the right wing and, people who listen to Fox News are they're quite a force to contend with. I just received an email because I'm, trying to keep up with what's going on with the economics. And it's the right wing, the bourgeoisie, they're all concerned about this coming economic period and the demise of capitalism. And the problem is that they're blaming the socialists. And they're very upfront about this particular email that I got was from some fascist type of libertarian. And it's disturbing to read, of course. I actually sent that to just a handful of people that I know to just be aware of this type of thinking that's out there. So, I don't think, we're quite there yet. The belly of the beast is a hard, thing to deal with. We have to keep giving it, indigestion, but, the bourgeoisie has their own antacids to deal with us. And I think that, anyway, it's just getting hard.
Kit.
I'll thank you.
You've raised several important ideas. Gene, any comment?
Let's keep going.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Rich is next. Rich Fallenbaum.
Yes, thank you. Generally, we haven't discussed sectarian groups or evaluated them. So I welcome Gene's evaluation of the PSL and the Communist Party USA. I don't really agree with them. I think both of them have contracted the virus of opportunism to a large extent. And I think it makes them much weaker in different ways. I think PSL jumped into identity politics and sort of whatever the current movement is, and even going to extremes. And the Communist Party is in the same way. And I think they're sort of irrelevant politically now. And I don't think they can recover their positions. Regarding Bernie and the Democratic Socialists and the Squad, I think they have embraced imperialism. In some cases, they're more reactionary than the regular imperialists. And of course, the Democrats are very reactionary and imperialist too. I remember that they were most infuriated with the small gestures that Trump made to China and to North Korea and to Russia. This was Russia, of course, was terrible for the Democrats, and it's not much better for Bernie. And I think we should be very very critical of those people. Democratic socialism is not socialism; it's anti-socialism. It's socialism. It's capitalism with a socialist veneer, and it's these people are really not for socialism. Anyway, or at least not objectively. But let me just follow up on Kit a little bit. The problems of living in our society. I think the socialism has lost its attraction for the masses as capitalism has consolidated further, and capitalist rule consolidated. Once capitalism rule and technological developments, the whole productive sector developed, and I think we have to analyze that. Not I don't think we can simply quote Lenin or Stalin or Martin Luther King or anybody else at this point. I think we have to go back to basics and analyze these societies and what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are and what the source of crisis in particularly American society. And we'll find it's quite a complicated thing, and we have to develop the tools to deal with those complexities. It's not just a few slogans. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Richard. I don't have anybody on the stack at the moment, so I think I'm going to call on myself. I too was grateful that Gene shared the names of the particular groups that he looks to, and we have a long way to go, a very long way to go in building the socialist left in this country, the Marxist left, or the Leninist left. But I don't share Richard's lack of hope for the Communist Party USA. That's why I'm close to it. But in general, I think from what I know from talking to different people, several of the groups, including the two that Gene mentioned and others, have been enjoying an upsurge of people who join on the internet. So the numbers are fairly impressive. However, when someone joins a group, an organization on the internet, they don't necessarily think they're joining up to become an activist or a cadre. And they just think that, they want to get the publication, or they want to express their sentiments in regard to what the group stands for. And to turn those people into real, cadre or members or activist members is a very long process. But it is encouraging to know that people are, identifying themselves as socialists or Marxists. I run into people all the time who, when I tell them that I'm on the board of the Marxist Library in Oakland, they say, "Oh, I'm a Marxist. What do you do? And who are you? And what resources do you have?" So I find that encouraging, but very sobering about how far we still have to go. In terms of what I think that referring to the Republicans as the party of the bourgeoisie is not correct. Both parties are parties of the bourgeoisie. They haven't figured out, they don't want to rule with fascism if they can get away with it. They never do. They want to rule with the most democratic, in air quotes, facade that they can possibly have, and convince people that we all, are equally participating in decisions about the future of policies. And they only decide to rule by fascism if they figure that they're really being threatened. So I think we haven't studied enough what the bourgeoisie wants is how the bourgeoisie is trying to rule through the Democratic Party. But we can see some of the manifestations of it in the circus that's going on in Washington at the moment, and the Cold War buildup against China, as Eugene pointed out. So I think we do need to look at what does it mean to build a united front against fascism, and right now. And I think that's the road to the immediate task that we have. And I'm going to stop there now, but who would like to be on the stack, or who would like to jump in? Eugene, do you want to move the discussion?
Yeah, I'll say a little bit more. Yeah, I'm unmuted. Yeah, because that's true. And one of the things that our comrade Tom Gallagher, when he was here, he said about talking about socialism, is that how do we get these ideas across in forms that the people will talk about? But one of the things about Bernie, for all his faults, and he does have a lot, although his foreign policy when he was mayor of Burlington, New York, Vermont, a very progressive one, and he actually did made a campaign trip to the Soviet Union in 1988, I believe, which I think was when I made a quick tour of the Soviet Union. So and he had very positive things about it. So he's a mixed guy. I agree. But one of the things that Tom Gallagher was saying is that we need to learn how to talk to people in terms that they understand. If you say, well, I'm a Marxist Leninist and so forth, and we need to do this and this and this, you probably don't get much response. But on the other hand, there are ways, maybe better ways of engaging people. And one of the things about Bernie is that, and it's not just Bernie, but if you say if I wear my Bernie t-shirts, a lot of people nod and are responsive, and people at least know, okay, you're a Bernie person. I know who you are, and like Bernie said, that we have won first of all the ideological problem, and that people at least know what socialism is, and it's not beyond the pale, as it was back in the McCarthy period and for a lot of US history. And the second, that youth is on our side. If you talk about, support for socialism is probably majority support among those under 30, under 40. And this is something new. So there are things that are working, and we like to think that they're, time is on our side. Unfortunately, we have no time. I really, the fact that the pro-Trump people may well win the 2022 elections, and the fact that Trump may even win the election, or Trump or worse, might even win the presidency back in 2024 is pretty scary. And I know the alternative, who is Biden would be reelected, is also very scary. So, anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you. So we have two people on the stack. I'm going to call on Norma first because she hasn't spoken, and then Yusuf. Go ahead, Norma.
You could talk to Yusuf first. I don't mind.
All right. Yusuf, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, yes, I wish you would, in your talks in general, distinguish between utopian socialists, social democrats, and Marxist-Leninist socialists. I think that's a important distinction. And my general criticism is that just about anybody who uses the word socialism is put in the same sack, so to speak. Also, I think the 60s were fun, but I agree with Richard. Distinctly, the anti-working class, or aloof from the, at best, aloof from the working class. Even in third world countries, people sort of forgot about, had a tendency to forget about the working class and concentrate on the petty bourgeoisie and national bourgeoisie, make a coup, and somehow that will lead to socialism. That was a common error, and in the States and Europe, there was a general anti-science, anti-materialist, and we view that the working class was passé. So I'd like you to comment on this.
Gene?
Well, first of all, this whole I have talked about this before, and I did have one of the slides I cut was, the image of the Marxist-Lenin or the Leninist concept of socialism versus the, quote, democratic version, which I tend to link in with utopian socialism. Because again, people who say that Leninism is not democratic, my response is, they're full of shit. Leninism is more democratic. The dictatorship of the proletariat, they have more democracy in China than we do in the United States, in part because they would never even let somebody like Trump run. And letting Trump, and when we have a choice between Trump and Hillary Clinton, what kind of choice is that? But it's not going to get very far in talking to people, within ourselves. When we're talking within ourselves, we can say things and we tend to have a common base here. But if you go talk to people on the street, you knock on somebody's door, and I want to tell you how China is more democratic than the United States. And that won't go very far. So we do need to figure out how to talk to people who are not part of us. But again, Bernie is done. At least people, when I wear my Bernie T-shirts and things like that, people at least have a vague idea, and it's not hostile idea. I'll pass it on to Norma, I guess.
Go ahead, Norma.
Okay, hi, everybody. I put a note into the chat, which kind of undergirds what I'm going to talk about, although what I'm going to talk about is probably a really long-term look at what we need to do. We're so accustomed to, we have public education. A child, a 14-year-old girl, called it free compulsory education, which is what our free schooling is, our free public schooling is. And I think that gives a good clue as to how we are made to think of our relationship to the structures we live with in society. First of all, we've been colonized, and we haven't thrown off the colonial structures yet. We keep repeating them and trying to make them nice, instead of looking at the mentality that it produces to have those structures. Nobody likes, if you looked at my comment, everybody hates jobs, schools, and there are elements of those things that we like doing. Elements, though. In general, the whole arrangement is obnoxious to us. It's painful to us. So our objective, and it's been said a number of times by many people here on this list today, that we need to talk with people. I agree, but I'd like to see if we can talk with them in terms of they are right and we are coming along. I think of Cuba. Cuba has a place for containment of very badly disoriented people, either actually mentally ill or just disoriented and unable to fit in comfortably in society. And they have a place where they're put together and given opportunities to produce stuff that the community wants to have done. Whatever the production is, it's insignificant, certainly in regard to maintaining and advancing the structure of society, but it is something that is kind. And I'm saying we need to come out in a way, we need to find ways to get people to be kind to themselves. After all, they worship a God who hates them. Let alone a state that hates them. So and we do this. We talk to people relative to the things that they want. They want housing. They want gentle society to live in, so on. They can name those, and we can name them with them. Trying to get a base to develop within the community while the people are being marshaled, as Trajan was talking about, marshaled into the slave system of having to keep our owners rich, is such a contradiction. How can we get them, how can we encourage people to work to liberate themselves materially, to physically change their lives, so that they can speak of themselves as not having to be pushed into robotic relation to society, a robotic relation to production, to going to classroom and answering the questions and getting a decent grade and advancing to degrees. The whole arrangement, and a bell to get you to move through the halls or into the building. It needs to be examined from another aspect. People don't like the structure we're living in, and they don't like their lack of control, and they do like a whole bunch of other stuff.
Thank you, Norma. Next is Richard W.
Oh, can you put me on the stack too, Kit?
Yes. Go
Thank
ahead.
you.
Go ahead, Richard.
So I wanted to comment a little bit on what Gene was talking about way back when. And it occurred to me that one of the problems we have, or one of the problems I have certainly, is that when I'm talking to people about these communist socialist concepts, that they're so misinformed, or they're not misinformed, that they're the product of a lot of misinformation, and that you really have to clear out a ton of debris from years and years and years of inconsistent exposure to bourgeois economic ideas. That alone is a task unto itself. And I wanted to tie that into, this is where I thought that Martin Luther King, that the Beyond Vietnam speech comes into play, because he does a really good job of tying the effects of bourgeois economic policy, imperialism, into daily life. And as I recall, when his speech came out, it was rejected very much by liberal Democrats. I mean, like they were aghast at why he should even do this. And I suspect that probably the same is still true. But nevertheless, I see him useful, and I go back, when I'm talking to people, I try to remember my Beyond Vietnam speech and bring out points that he addressed, 40, 50 years ago now. Anyways, so that's all I had. I wanted to say, comment on.
Okay. Next is Kit. Go ahead, Kit.
Hi. Yes. Yeah, this thing about education is so key. I mean, we need people in our ranks who can write New York Times bestseller to educate the masses, which won't happen. And we have a lot of competition online regarding so many articles that people have to glean through, and many people don't have the guidance of the party to, help them sift through all the materials that are out there to understand, some of these concepts between utopian socialism, social democracy, Marxism, Leninism, etc. And we have, I was wondering how many people are on the stack. If we have less than 20 people this Sunday on the stack, which, well, are we talking to ourselves? Are we able to get beyond our circle here online? I think next week we'll have more people, not next week, but on the 14th, we'll get more people, because we'll be talking about the militarization of space, because it deals with a technology age that we're already immersed in, that the young people are tuned up with. And I think that Marx and Leninism would be at awe and baffled by this whole period that we're living in. I think a lot of us are in our golden age period. We won't be the ones to be around for the young people. So we need to, set a really strong example now in this period. I think within the next decade, at least, have a foundation that, younger people can look for. But anyway, I know I have some more to say, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you. Oh, and one more thing. I think libertarian individualism is a real problem in the United States. This is constantly keeps rearing its ugly head. So that's something else we have to contend with. Thank you.
Thank you, Kit.
I just have another line to add.
Okay, go ahead, Norma, because there's no one else at the moment.
All right, connected with your idea about the draft. My husband used to say that too. There needed to be a draft, but he was talking about a more reasonable constitution of the arrangement. We needed a draft offered to people to join it. People love, there's a thing about soldiers now on the PBS talking about how they are so affected by PTSD. And it turns out one of the things to help them get over that is to give them a dog, often wanting a dog that had been in the military, but give them a dog and talk to them about working with it and having them do it with other military people who have been so abused, so hurt that they could barely function their own selves, on the verge of suicide and so on. And that being together with those people that they were together with on the ground in the war heals them suddenly, because they're back in the situation that there's so much miss. Well, anyway, that's only one thing that
Okay.
I'm talking about. A draft. We got my daughter to go into the civil what do they call it? CC something or other. And she had a bad experience. She had a good and a bad experience. She was about 17, had not finished high school. She just didn't go to classes. And she got her GED there, but she didn't stay. Why? Because the people behaved so badly with regard to sex and cigarettes and dope and behavior like that. So the thing we need, if we ever get a draft together that appeals to people, that they join it and it has meaning for them.
Okay, Norma,
yes,
you've over.
I know I've over. Yeah, but in the meantime, trying to get out this complicated idea of a draft that serves us, that we like.
Okay, so let me answer that, and then I'll call on two people with their hands up. Those of us who regret having opposed the draft, first of all, it's not because of us that they took away the draft. The bourgeoisie wanted to take away the draft so that as a way of countering the anti-war movement. What we have now in this country is the poverty draft, and that people who get recruited to the armed forces are poor people, or in some other ways disadvantaged people. And that's why I regret that I worked against the draft. I think if we still had a draft, there'd be a lot more resistance to US imperialism. I will now call on Jean and then Richard Fallenbaum. Go ahead, Jean.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little mea culpa here, because I have succumbed to an occupational hazard of my 30 plus years as a professor. Namely is I don't really have to worry about whether people like what I say or not, because they're going to have to take an exam at the end of the semester, and they will get a grade, so they have to know how to respond to that. So that's kind of a privileged position. And I don't regret it, because, I was fair. I said, there are certain questions you have to answer. And I remember one woman, I asked them to, summarize the theory of evolution in a few words, and she went and say whether you agree with it or not. And this one woman, I remember, she wrote a great essay in like under 200 words, summarizing the theory of evolution better than anybody than I could. And then the final point was, but I don't agree with any of this. I believe that we were, just like the Bible says, we were created in 4004 BC. And so she had the information, but she didn't agree. And of course, she did well in the class, because you can't penalize people for having their own views. And that's always been my approach on this. And the other thing is, I think I've been less concerned about being popular than presenting a realistic view of the world. And just, we don't have a lot of, we have 500, 600 people who follow us on occasion. And so there are people who, like Richard Wolff has 2 million or something, hundreds of thousands of people and so forth. But I would still rather say what I say and have 5 followers than say what Richard Wolff is saying, because I think there's some fundamental errors there. And I would not want to be popular by saying that. So, and again, that's maybe a sectarian view or what, but, there is, something that it appears somewhere by George Orwell saying that there was truth and there was untruth. And it did not matter whether you stood for the truth, even against the whole world. You were not mad. And this was what he had on, he had a magazine called The Minority of One. Not George Orwell, but this was quoted on that. So I just want to say again, what we're about here, I think, at the Marxist Library is debating significant ideas, not necessarily about being popular. Although I don't want to say we shouldn't be popular, but that's not the primary focus of what we're doing. But I'll stop there.
Thank you. Richard Fallenbaum, you're next.
Okay, just aside on what Gene said, well, I'm also worried about being unpopular, or I'm not worried about being unpopular. I'm worried about being wrong and unpopular. So hopefully I can avoid that and at least be one of those. Only one of those. At any rate, I disagree with the idea that everybody hates education and everybody hates work. Yes, certainly around the situation of work. It's not exactly like it was in the 19th century. There are a lot of people in the world who still, probably more than we recognize, were still living working in 19th century conditions. But there are a lot of people in the United States, in the belly of the beast, probably a majority, don't feel that. That's the problem, and they like the material possessions. They don't mind the work so much. Sometimes they find it quite challenging. It's intellectually challenging. It's physically challenging, and so forth. It's satisfying. So despite all the problems, they're happy with it. They have a contented life, and it's not a small minority. It may even be a majority. So we have to recognize that, and it may be under certain circumstances it's not going to. They're a barrier towards going to a more advanced social system, socialism or communism. So, but just to say everybody's unhappy is if everybody was unhappy, we'd have a revolution. We're not having a revolution because everybody's unhappy. We're not having a revolution because everybody is not unhappy. And so that's my contribution.
Thank you, Richard. I agree with that. And I was thinking about what I said before and saying that what we need is a united front now against fascism. But actually, I think we need to be more specific when we talk about the united front. I think it would be more healthier to talk about united front against war and racism. Because I think people think of fascism and however they think of it as a very abstract thing, whereas war and racism are much more impinging on people's lives. And we should never forget the centrality of the struggle against racism and what that really means. So I've been reading a lot around, this the so-called controversy about the teaching of critical race theory, which of course is just being raised as a red herring by the Republicans, and they've been very successful at it in certain places. But there is something to be said about if we're teaching white kids to feel guilty about racism, that's the wrong thing. I don't think that's what is happening very much, but to the extent that critical race theory does that, I think that is incorrect. What we need is for us to be angry about racism. I don't feel guilty. I feel angry that racism has caused me to be disconnected with so many people in the working class, and that I'm angry that they've taught me and people like me and my child that somehow my enemy or my competitor is a Black person or a person of color, and that's who I'm competing against to get a job or get ahead or get a place in college or whatever it is. And that makes me furious that the working class has been divided like that. And I think that when we talk about why we're opposed to racism, we need to remember how racism has been used so successfully in this country to divide the working class. And that is the reason that we're the only advanced industrial country that doesn't have universal child care and paid family leave, among many other things that we don't have. So let me see, I think Yusuf is next, and then Norma, unless anyone who hasn't spoken or hasn't spoken in quite a while wants to jump in. But we do have just a few minutes left before we end the recording. So Yusuf, you're on.
Yes, no, about unhappiness, I don't think that's the problem. People are unhappy. It's just that people don't see a prospect for radical change, for substantial change. Sometimes it actually, not sometimes, but quite frequently comes about when things start getting better and people are energized that things could be even better. And that spurs them to opt for radical change, i.e. revolution. So I just want to comment on that.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Norma, and then I'm going to give Gene the final word if he wants it. Go ahead, Norma. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Richard Fallenbaum, I didn't say that people hated education. I hope you didn't pretend that or make it sound as though I said that. I mean, first of all, that's impossible. There's no way not to be educated. You come into the world, well, actually, even before you get out of your mother, you're getting educated, you're getting experience, you're getting eventually ideas. So that happens all the time. I said school, and I said that people hate school. That's my frequent statement. And it's for all the configuration it's done in, the arrangement that it's done in. They're going to test you on material, Gene cited perfectly. For all that, he made a marvelous presentation to back up what we do, a very poetic kind of presentation, talking about his ability or his need. He's required to test people on what he's been teaching. Everybody as a teacher is required to do that. People don't like to be put in that position. And the whole thing becomes a resentment of the control that the structure that we live in has over us, rather than that we that we are the ones that can control it. I went to school where there was a place where a test was an organizing tool, that after you study the thing, a clever teacher would give the test, and the idea of being graded on it was another problem, but the test often made sense or made better sense or made more enjoyable the knowledge that was shared. And what I want is, there was a letter to the editor the other day talking about, well, it's simple to learn the three sides of the triangle, something like that, whatever it was. And I'm saying that the learning of that kind of thing needs to happen as an experience that the person, the student, the child, that the child is engaged in some activity where that becomes an evident need. And so they want it and they're offered it by this environment that they're in, rather than that they're imposed upon it. It's often a study that they will forget. They'll say, oh yeah, I had that in 7th grade and I don't remember a thing about how to do that.
Okay, thank you, Norma. We're going to give the last word to Jean.
Right. You know, I did not say that education is bad.
You. Thank you. We heard that. Jean, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate everybody's discussion on this, and I will note that you know, at our max we had maybe 16 or 17 people, and we still have 14. So maybe people have gone to sleep by now or something. But we do have, I think, a number of people who are listening to the conversation, and we haven't lost them. So I think that's still a worthwhile experience for us to continue to do this, even though we are a very small group of people. On the draft, I'm not against the draft necessarily, as long as they're not being drafted to kill people. And the same way with an volunteer army, as long as they don't go out and kill people. I'm against war, basically, and that's why I'm a member of Veterans for Peace, is that we are, you know, we're educational humanitarian organization dedicated to the abolishment of war. And the only way we're going to do that is socialism. Again, and that's part of what I like about PSL, is that they are out there. They have slogans like Trump is the disease, Trump is the symptom, capitalism is the disease, socialism is the solution. That's a very simple idea. It is also a very correct idea, I think. And they do make a very effort to not only to do this, but they've also republished Lenin's imperialism with their notes and so forth. So, I mean, they do operate at different levels, which I appreciate they're doing that. And they bring people in. I remember we had, I think it was Louise, was her name, House, spoke at our talk on the goings on in Denver and Aurora, Denver. And she is one of the people who, you know, are facing life imprisonment for kidnapping the police, because they formed a cordon around the police department. And they were charged with, I mean, it was a totally bogus charge, but still. But, you know, I think they're doing a very good job of both reaching out to people with slogans that people can easily understand, that do and are also correct slogans. I think Richard Wolff saying all we need is, you know, what does he go for? You know, little communes or co-ops, you know, co-ops equals socialism. That's a partially good idea. I mean, it's partially correct and it's worth discussing, but that's not the sort of thing that they're doing. And I think we have to be real receptive also with groups like DSA. You know, they do some things that I mean, I've been a member of DSA. but I don't really hang out with them because they do some really stupid things. On the other hand, they do some very good things, and that's kind of the situation we're in. So at any rate, I'll just pause there and again say that I may be coercive in the way I used to teach and so forth, but you are paid not necessarily to teach, but paid to give grades, and unfortunately, that's the way the system worked. But I don't think even such, no one was really damaged by sitting and listening to me for 45 hours as part of their 4 years of education. So at any rate, I'll pause there, but thank everybody for joining. Thank you, Sharon, for doing such a great job and volunteering, even with your hand. Great, your hand looks great. So looking good, thanks.
Thank you.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.